There are 732 of them, each one a miniature château, white stone facades, conical blue turrets, arched windows, wrought iron balconies, each one identical to its neighbor, lined up across the hillsides of a valley in northwestern Turkey like a fever dream someone had after watching too many European travel documentaries. From above, it looks like a fairy tale. From the inside, every single one is empty. This is Burj Al Babas, a $200 million luxury development in Mudurnu, a small town in the Bolu province of Turkey, built to sell fantasy homes to wealthy Gulf Arab buyers, each unit priced at roughly $400,000. The developer was one of Turkey's largest construction companies. The vision was bold. The marketing was spectacular. The project went bankrupt in 2018. Not one castle has ever been permanently occupied. The story of Burj Al Babas is not simply the story of a construction project that ran out of money. It is the story of what happens when a real estate fantasy collides with economic reality, and of the hundreds of buyers who handed over deposits for a dream and received, in return, absolutely nothing.
To understand why someone built 732 identical castles on a hillside in rural Turkey, you need to understand a specific decade of Turkish economic history and a specific hunger. The 2000s and early 2010s were, by almost any measure, extraordinary years for Turkey. GDP tripled between 2002 and 2012. The construction sector was the engine. The government, under Erdogan, made real estate development effectively the national sport, easing planning restrictions, providing cheap financing, and positioning Turkey as the regional hub for investment from the Gulf. It worked. Gulf Arab buyers, wealthy families from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, began pouring money into Turkish property. They were looking for second homes, investment assets, and summer retreats. Turkey offered a rare combination, a Muslim-majority country with European aesthetics, good food, dramatic landscapes, and prices that looked reasonable against Dubai's. Sarot Group, the Turkish construction conglomerate behind Burj Al Babas, read this market and made a call. They would not build generic apartments. They would not build standard villas. They would build something that would stop a Gulf buyer cold at a property expo in Dubai, something so striking, so fantastically impractical, so aggressively European fairy tale that it would become the only thing anyone was talking about. They would build châteaux. Not French country châteaux, mind you, not one, not a dozen. 732 identical miniature châteaux, each one a perfect replica of the others, cascading across a hillside in a valley near the historic town of Mudurnu, 2 hours southeast of Istanbul.
The master plan was genuinely ambitious. Beyond the castles, there would be a 5-star hotel at the center of the development, a spa complex, swimming pools, a shopping promenade, a mosque, landscaped gardens connecting the units. The whole valley, essentially, converted into a self-contained luxury resort village. The location itself had logic to it. Mudurnu sits in a region of dramatic forested hills and clean air. It is far enough from Istanbul to feel like an escape, close enough to reach it in a morning. The valley is genuinely beautiful. On paper, and the marketing paper was very, very glossy, this was a sellable vision. Sales began around 2014. Gulf Arab buyers responded. Units sold. Deposits were taken. Sarot Group broke ground and the construction crews moved in. For a while, if you flew a drone over the valley, you could watch an impossible thing rising out of the hillside. Row after row of fairy tale turrets appearing as if by magic from the Turkish countryside. The dream was real. The money was real. The construction was happening. And then, everything stopped.
2016 was a bad year to be selling luxury property in Turkey. In July of that year, a military coup attempt tore through the country. Tanks on bridges, jets over Ankara, hundreds dead. The political stability that had underpinned Turkey's investment boom was suddenly, visibly, fragile. Gulf buyers who had been happy enough to put deposits on Turkish castles when Turkey felt like a safe, prosperous, politically predictable country began to hesitate, then to withdraw. The tourism sector, which fed the broader property market, collapsed almost overnight. International visitor numbers fell by more than 30% in a single year. This was not a minor market correction. This was the ground giving way. Then came the Turkish lira. Already under pressure, the currency began a decline that would become a collapse. Between 2016 and 2021, the lira lost roughly 80% of its value against the dollar. For a company like Surat Group, which had borrowed heavily in foreign currency to fund construction costs but was collecting deposits and revenues in lira, this was not just a problem, it was arithmetic death. Think of it this way. You borrow $100 million to build something. You price your units at a rate that makes sense when your currency is worth a certain amount. Then your currency halves, then halves again. Your debt, measured in real purchasing power, doubles, then doubles again. The number on the contract doesn't change. The reality of what that number is worth changes completely. This is what happened to Burj Al Babas. Not incompetent design, not poor construction, not bad taste, though the taste is, objectively, extremely specific. The project was killed by macroeconomics it had no control over, compounded by political shocks it hadn't priced in.
In 2018, Surat Group filed for bankruptcy protection. The debt load was reported at approximately 1.8 billion Turkish lira, at that point, roughly $300 million. The central luxury hotel at the heart of the development, the social and commercial anchor that would have made the whole thing function as a community, had never been completed. The amenities promised in the brochures, the spas, the promenades, the pools, existed only in the renders. The 732 castles stood complete, roofed, windowed, turreted, and entirely, perfectly, hollow. Somewhere in Kuwait, there is a family who paid $400,000 for a miniature castle in a Turkish valley. They paid the deposit, they signed the contract, they showed the renders to their children, who asked which tower room they would sleep in. They planned the summer trips. They imagined the cool air of the Bolu Hills in August, the escape from the Gulf heat, the novelty of waking up in something that looked, faintly, like a scene from a story. They have never received the keys.
The buyers of Burj Al Babas units came predominantly from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Qatar. Exact numbers are difficult to verify. Surat Group's bankruptcy proceedings are not fully public, but Turkish media reports indicated that several hundred units had been pre-sold before the project stalled. Deposits ranged from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars per unit. When the bankruptcy was filed, those deposits became claims in a legal process that, for many foreign buyers, was practically inaccessible. Turkish bankruptcy law, Turkish courts, Turkish language, Turkish timelines. The buyers were not reckless speculators. Many were middle-class families in Gulf states, for whom $400,000 represented years of savings. Turkish property law at the time offered real but limited protections for off-plan buyers, especially foreign ones navigating a system in a language they did not speak, in a country going through a currency crisis and a political upheaval simultaneously. Several buyers interviewed by regional media described hiring Turkish lawyers at additional cost, waiting years for court proceedings, and receiving no clear timeline for resolution. Some had been told their cases might take a decade to conclude. A decade for a castle that is already built, already standing, already visible on Google Earth. The central hotel is the key detail here, because without the hotel, without the amenities, the staff, the central services, the development cannot function as sold. It is not simply cosmetically incomplete, it is structurally incomplete. A housing development built around a social hub that doesn't exist is not a village, it is a collection of buildings. Surat Group, to their credit, did not vanish. The company entered bankruptcy protection rather than dissolving outright, and in subsequent years made public statements about seeking new investors to complete the project. Various reports have indicated partial interest from potential buyers, including, at various points, investors from China and the Gulf. As of the time of this script, the hotel remains unfinished. The castles remain empty. Here is the detail that makes Burj Al Babas genuinely strange rather than simply sad. The castles themselves are not poorly built. Construction quality, by most accounts of those who have toured them, is reasonable. The units are proper-sized homes, 3 to 4 bedrooms, multiple floors, the turret room at the top functioning as a usable space, not purely decorative. The failure was not in the brick and mortar. It was in everything surrounding the brick and mortar. The timing, the currency, the political moment, the debt structure, the assumption that the market conditions of 2013 would persist through 2018. This is a city that wasn't brought down by bad engineering.
It was brought down by a spreadsheet that stopped making sense.
The town of Mudurnu sits nearby, carrying its own quiet irony. It is a genuinely historic Ottoman town. Traditional wooden-framed houses, a centuries-old mosque, a market square that has functioned since before the concept of a sales brochure existed. Real architecture, real history, real community. 2 kilometers up the road, 732 fake châteaux, built to simulate a European heritage that has no connection to this land, for buyers who were never able to arrive, sitting on a hillside that doesn't know what to do with them. There is something that happens when a fantasy is built in the wrong place for the wrong moment by people who needed the dream to be true badly enough to ignore the signals that it wasn't. Burj Al Babas is not unique in this. History is full of planned communities that became monuments to the gap between a render and a reality. Caufé Dien in China, Quilamba in Angola, Ordos in Inner Mongolia. The geography and the architecture change. The story doesn't. Someone always has too much confidence. Someone always has too much debt. Someone always assumes the market will continue to behave the way it behaved last year.
The saddest part is not the empty castles. Empty buildings are a logistical problem. They can, in theory, be filled. The saddest part is the specific nature of what was sold. Not an apartment, not an investment vehicle, a fairy tale, a turret, a place where your children would ask which tower room was theirs. You cannot file a legal claim for a fairy tale that didn't happen. The renders are still beautiful. The valley is still there. The buyers are still waiting. And somewhere on a hillside in rural Turkey, 732 miniature châteaux are quietly, patiently, proving that you can build anything you want. You just can't build the people to live in it.